I want to create non-profit, like an app that connects women programmers to female mentors, or even an app that shows you where the best Christmas lights are in the neighborhood.
Would have sent you through to the
To this, the full council meeting on Wednesday, the 11th of September 2024 at 5 p.m. The meeting is, as usual, hybrid, and we have participants joining the meeting remotely. It is being streamed live and stored for later viewing. I can suspend the webcast if I consider that it will affect proceedings. A recording of the meeting will be published on the Council's YouTube channel. Any motions or amendments need to be moved and seconded as usual, and any votes will be by roll call, given that we have members online. I will be flexible within reason in the length of time people can speak due to circumstances. Now I'm moving to the agenda, and the first one is apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Provost.
I will be flexible within reason in the length of time people can speak due to circumstances.
You can call me.
Agenda, and the first one is apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Provost.
I will be flexible within reason in the length of time.
Hi, Councillor Devlin, have you got something on in the background?
Yeah, that's fine. No, it's you. It's you, Mary, that goes in the background. It's your voice that's repeating what you've already said.
Hi, Councillor Devlin, have you got something on?
Well, that's it.
Hello?
So can everybody mute whatever device they're using, so that we don't have the background noise and we don't have me on repeat? And I will just continue from now. So, apologies for absence. Councillor MacDonald.
There's no apologies for absence, Chair. Councillor
Right.
MacDonald is remote.
Okay, I didn't realise that. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest on any item coming before us this evening, colleagues? Indicating no. Item 3, minutes of meeting held on the 26th of... Councillor Morrison?
Thank you, Provost. You're about to propose the minutes of the full council meeting of June 24. I have a proposed amendment because I believe the minutes are erroneous, from the point of view that there were 2 questions asked under the item Capital Fund Programme, which have not been reflected in the minutes, neither the questions nor the answers. Traditionally, when members raise questions or seek points of clarity, it is minuted, so that there's evidence of transparency and scrutiny taking place. So I believe the minutes should be corrected to reflect that. Thank you.
I'll take advice on that, but they are not verbatim minutes, and so I will take advice from Jerry. So you want something added to the minutes?
Yes.
Councillor Morrison, just to be clear.
Yeah, to be clear, Provost, looking at various items of council minutes going back to April 23, June 23, September 23, generally where there is a question raised or discussion within the chamber or further clarity provided by an officer. You're correct, it's not verbatim. It's not a replication of Hansard where word for word there's a replica of what's been said, but generally there is an indication that a question has been asked and an answer has been provided, which is not included in these minutes. So there's a question around the Ors Road development where there's likely to be a delay, and there was a question around the extension to Crookford Primary School. So I believe that those questions and those answers are omitted from the minutes. Thank you.
I'll ask Jerry to answer, thanks.
Chair, in terms of the Council's standing orders, any amendment to the minutes requires to be seconded before
Yes.
that matter is taken forward. In the event that the issue is, or the matter is seconded, then the nature of, or the particular nature of the amendment proposed has to be considered, and a decision therefore has to be taken on whether or not the minute needs to encompass that particular content, or whether, given as you've indicated that it's not a verbatim account, there is sufficient in the minute to provide an overview of the content of the discussion at that time.
So, as Jerry, as the intervention, I will continue from what I was saying there, that we have the minute proposed for this meeting and for approval, and I hear that there is an amendment. I will ask for a seconder in future, but I would ask for cooperation in future from all colleagues. Please don't spring this on us. You know, if there is something that you feel should be included, it would be helpful to everybody for us to have that beforehand to consider.
Okay, take on board the prior notice for the future provost.
Okay, thank you.
I will take that approach.
Okay.
I'm certainly coming to the point of view, not trying to be awkward.
Sorry, I'll just continue. If you could just switch off your microphone.
Yeah, okay.
So I do appreciate that. So we have a proposer for this amendment. Is there a seconder?
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you very much. And can we have a form of words then for the amendment? I'll just switch off and let you put that forward, please. And if we could take a note, again, it would be helpful if we had this beforehand, but we will take a note.
The proposed amendment is that the minute of the council meeting for June 24 at paragraph 293 is updated to reflect the questions and the answers which were transacted when that item of business was discussed.
Regarding specifically, I think it was 2 issues that you raised. Could you mention them as well, please?
Well, the items that were discussed on the paper. The first item, from memory, was the proposed the extension to. No, the first item was the Oars Road project, and whether there would be a delay or not. And the second item was in terms of the Oars Road project, no, the Crookford Primary School project. But there may be other members, other questions which elected members raised, which should be managed too. So I can only speak for myself in this regard. That's
the problem with going down this road, really, because the papers bear out, and it would have been helpful if people had communicated this. But we'll see how this goes on this occasion. I'll ask, is that sufficient for an amendment in words? Is that enough for this to go forward and go to a vote? You can get.
Chair, it's been indicated to me by Democratic Services Manager that in the current context with recordings of previous meetings that would be sufficient to allow him to obtain a more accurate reflection of the particular questions that were asked.
So I will now hand over to Jerry to go to a vote for this amendment.
Chair, in the first instance, the minutes as they currently stand should be proposed by yourself as Provost, and obviously we would require a seconder for the original minute as well.
Okay, so I will do that. I will propose the original minutes, and do I have a seconder for the original minutes? For the original, they've got to be proposed and seconded, and then there's the amendment proposed and seconded. So it's the original minutes, I have to propose them. Do I have a seconder? Okay, I'm advised in the circumstances then there is now no need for a vote for the amendment, and the amendment is now carried. Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you for the advice. Item 4. Minutes of meetings for the period 18th June to the 5th of September. And the list is part of your minutes in front of you, or it's a separate supplementary. I will go down the list as usual, and please stop me if I'm too quick. I can easily go back. Appointments Committee, 18th of June. The full Council of 26 has already been agreed. Appeals Committee, 1st of August. Licensing Committee, 6th of August. Local Review Body, 7th August. Audit and Scrutiny Committee, 8th of August. Cabinet, 15th of August. Education Committee, 22nd of August. Licensing Committee, 3rd of September. And the Cabinet of the 5th of September. Can we agree those minutes, colleagues? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you. Item 5, statements by conveners and representatives of joint boards and committees. And there are two. First of all, in alphabetical order, Councillor Anderson, Convener of Education and Equalities.
Thank you, Provost. So, my statement has three parts. So, the first part is regarding Thornley Bank Community Garden. On Monday, the 2nd of September 2024, the Culture and Leisure Trust welcomed local school pupils, volunteers, community leaders, including the Provost, to the unveiling of the new community garden at Thornley Bank Library. Library staff, led by the Library Development Officer Gillian Hamilton, have worked with local volunteers and school pupils over the last 3 years to transform the outdoor space at the library into a community garden for local residents to enjoy. With funding from the Scottish Library and Information Council and participatory budgeting allocated to Thornley Bank together. The Thornley Bank Primary School pupils contributed the initial design ideas and were delighted to see their ideas come to life, with planters for growing fruit and vegetables, fruit trees and seating areas for children and adults to relax and enjoy the space. Other features include a large bug hotel, ladybird crossing and children's games, as well as vegetable planters, rhubarb and herbs, apple and gooseberry trees and various plants that attract bees and butterflies. Thornley Bank's Library's new community garden is a part of a wider initiative, the Root Cause Project, which has been running across East Renfrewshire libraries and includes partnerships with local organisations such as Apparel Exchange for clothes recycling, Halloween costume and welly swaps, the introduction of seed libraries and a range of programmes, events and activities that have been designed to raise awareness of sustainability, green issues and the environment. Second part of my statement is regards to summer holiday camps, and there's two parts to this. The first part is the Culture and Leisure Trust again delivered a very successful summer holiday activity camp, and these were held in Barrhead High School and Williamwood High School this summer. The camps offered multi-activities from 9 to 3 each day on a week-by-week basis. They included a nutritious lunch, which are vital for some pupils over the extended summer school holidays. And outdoor activities were prioritised each day, but there were backup indoor facilities for our inclement weather, considering the summer we've just had. Camps were available for 5-year-olds to 14, with age-appropriate groups rotating around different activities from archery to tennis and dance to drama each day. The Trust also supported Ismail Mayor School over the summer school holidays by providing activity instructors each week of their programme. The range of the Culture and Leisure staff working with school staff to deliver activities each day included staff from libraries, arts, drama and sports. Pupils got to experience a host of engaging activities, from a visit by a local author to arts and crafts and parachute games. I'm sure all health and safety was observed there. The Culture and Leisure Trust will be building on these experiences by supporting a term-time weekly out-of-school activity programme through its Active Schools team. The final part of my statement is with regards to the Culture and Leisure Trust board meeting, which I attended last month. In addition to signing off the final year accounts, we heard that the current year's progress continues to be astonishingly positive. With regards to leisure centre attendances, library attendances, gym memberships, community facilities, bookings, theatre attendances and public swimming are all ahead of target. Thank you, Provost. Sorry, I've just realised there's a paragraph, a final one. Gym memberships are also, and swimming lesson participants in theatre performance continue to be at an all-time high. Indeed, over the last decade, the Trust has grown its commercial revenue by over 55%, whilst delivering savings to the Council and managing cost inflation keenly. And I want to take this opportunity to commend and thank everyone for these achievements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson. I'm sure your commendation will be well supported by colleagues here to thank and commend everybody involved. Thank you. I'll now move to Councillor Pragnell to give a statement. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. At our Integration Joint Board on the 16th of August, we had a presentation on the Health and Social Care Partnership's front door for adult services and the work of the Peer Professional Review Group, similar to the information we heard today at the session prior to Council. There was also discussion around finance, an overview of the Audit Scotland report looking at finance and performance of IJBs during 2022 and 2023 was presented. There was no real surprises from the report, and messages mirrored the local issues and challenges we have been discussing at the IJB for some time. The report states that community health and social care faces unprecedented pressures and financial uncertainty with rising unmet need. To respond to the significant and complex challenges, all bodies need to work collaboratively, as IGBs alone cannot address the crisis. The report will be shared with the Council's Audit and Scrutiny Committee, and the next iteration, produced jointly with the Auditor General for Scotland, will take a whole system approach and will make recommendations to the Scottish Government, councils, NHS boards, as well as IGBs. The first revenue monitoring report for this financial year was also presented, which shows a projected overspend of £1.241 million. The projected overspend against NHS funded activities continues to be driven by prescribing pressures. The position against our social work and social care funded activity shows a projected underspend of £0.692 million after offsetting the expected savings shortfalls and operational pressures. The IJB had previously agreed proposed in-year changes to the community alarm and Bonington House charges. Charges need to be agreed by the Council under current legislation. However, due to the election, the submission to Cabinet was delayed. The IJB agreed the revised timescale for implementation, and the proposal will be presented to Cabinet in October. We also had an update on the new Blood and Go service, which has had positive feedback from both patients and GPs, as well as updates on the Health and Care Experience Survey results and the Medication Assisted Treatment standards. Ratings for the MAT standards are either green or provisional green, which is the highest possible assessment for these standards at present. The next meeting of the IGB will take place on the 25th of September. Thank you.
Thank you for that report and ending on a high note as well. Thanks very much. On to the next item on the agenda. Item 6 is Provost engagement, and this is just a regular report on Provost civic engagement, simply for noting, and I would thank Councillor Campbell for deputising on some occasions. Thank you very much for that. Item 7, items remitted to the Council, is pages 11 to 26. First of all, item 7.1, final Treasury Management Report for 2023-24, remitted from Audit and Scrutiny Committee of the 8th of August. I will now turn to Councillor Morrison, Chair of Audit and Scrutiny Committee, to ask him to say a few words on this. Councillor Morrison.
Thank you very much, Provost. The annual Treasury Management Report for the year end 23-24 was considered by the Audit and Scrutiny Committee on the 8th of August. The report explains delays impacting on some major capital projects during the year, where we've had to borrow less as a result than what was planned for the year. However, as projects will still be delivered in future, we will still need to take on that borrowing in future years. So this is essentially a delay rather than a saving. Otherwise, in terms of performance, the committee was satisfied that we have operated within all indicators which measure risk, prudence and debt. And lastly, the report requests the list of counterparties in Appendix 8 be approved, and I'm happy on behalf of the committee to now remit this to Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morrison. Are there any questions on this agenda item? There are no questions. So thank you very much for that. And can we agree the recommendations? Agreed. Now moving on to the next agenda item, number 8. This is Strategic End-Year Performance Report and Annual Community Planning and Fairer East Renfrewshire Report for 2023-24, pages 27 to 110. Now there's a correction to some of the data in the report, and I'll invite Louise Pringle to clarify this. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. The data in the report is actually all right. It's a couple of comments in the report that we need to amend tonight. So you should all have in front of you a new sheet at your positions that gives the reference that I'm going to make here. So on page 24 of the actual report, or page 60 of the Council PDF pack, there are two indicators. The first one is about quality of life for carers. The graph is correct, but the comment was wrong. The comment was a later comment, so it should say, of the 159 valid responses, 134 reported their needs met this year. Performance is up from 80% in 22-23, and it remains above the target of 73%, as it has been since 2018-19. So that's the first one. And the second one, just underneath that, is the percentage of people whose care need has reduced following reablement or rehabilitation. So the comment there should say, performance has improved in 23-24, with 64% of people having their care need reduced following a period of reablement. Although performance has improved, service user number has reduced due to staff absence in the service and also greater complexity of people being referred. This has led to more success as referrals being chosen on suitability of successful reablement. Thank you, and apologies for that error.
Very good, thank you, Louise. Are there any questions on this at all? Councillor Edlin, Councillor Pragno, Councillor Ireland, in that order, please.
Thank you, Provost. Could I refer to page 56, please, on the graph? And it's quite startling there to see the percentage of service users moving from drug treatment to recovery has dramatically reduced. In fact, it's worse now than it goes back. It goes back to 2017, and it's still massively worse than that. And it's very concerning, because that indicates in our area there are more drug-related morbidities and mortalities than ever before. And I'd like to ask the question, first, what is the reason for this dramatic fall in recovery, and what is being done about that, or what is proposed to be done about it, taking a long-term view? Thank you.
Julie, can I ask you to...
I'm being Mark Ratter, am I? Doesn't matter. Thank you, Councillor Edlin. I would just point out there are quite small numbers there, and it will vary from year to year, depending on the cohort of people and their ability and their speed in terms of their recovery. But it's certainly a key priority for the service. As I say, there are individual factors like ill health that people have, and they're not able to move forward. But we are actively looking at trying to develop a recovery hub and put some more resources towards recovery. So it's something we're very conscious of. We'll keep the target under review, but I would just point out it is quite small numbers. So it does seem dramatic, but I'd say they're small numbers, and we're working very much with individuals, and that varies from year to year in terms of people's ability to move on and the speed at which they can move on. Can I just... we haven't increased morbidity. Our drug deaths have remained similar to last year, so there's been no change in that. Is that okay?
Councillor Edlin, do you want to...
Entry, please.
Yes.
Just looking at the numbers, there's 11 4% referrals, 11 individuals concerned, and I think 4 of them, I'm trying to look at the number, 14 individuals equating to 7% of all referrals to the team. The statistics are significant, even though it's a small number. And I'd like to think there'd be a definitive plan in place to deal with this going forward. I mean, it is noticeable to people looking at this that I don't know, I'm sure it's probably worse than Glasgow actually, but having said that, it's still quite concerning, and I would certainly like to see a plan in place to try and get this graph to look a bit more positive as it did in 2019.
It's a reduction of 3 people, so but we will, if that's something you're particularly concerned about, we will look and see whether we can provide a report in terms of are encouraging people in terms of recovery.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Oh, sorry, I've not paying attention to my wee list of speakers. Councillor Pragnell, then Councillor Ireland, and if anybody else wishes to speak, you let me know.
Yeah.
Thanks, Provost. I have a few questions that I believe can be answered by Julie Murray and Louise Pringle. On page 39 of the report, the combined report, it says the proportion of P1s who have reached all the expected milestones on entry to primary school, there seems to have been a decrease. So those who are from the more affluent areas, there seems to be a decrease of them meeting their targets. So I just wondered why that was. And on page 54 of the report, it mentions community payback orders, and that did community payback orders help you to look at stopping to offend? I noticed that it says that these surveys are voluntary, but is there anything more we can do to encourage people to fill out these surveys? And on yes, I think that's me for this item. Thank you.
So there are a number of questions there, Councillor Pragnell, so I think if I go to Mark first of all. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Councillor Pragnell. It's a very good question around the Quintile 5 young learners. You'll know that we had a discussion about that at Education Committee, and we included that in our early years report that went on the 6th of June. That's an unusual trend that we had a sort of closing of the gap very significantly, so that there was no gap between Quintile 1 and Quintile 5 for that particular cohort. We don't really know why that is. We tend to look at trends over time, so we will be doing the developmental milestones for our P1 learners at the moment, and we'll certainly look at that in more detail. What we did kind of highlight to Education Committee was that those learners that sat the developmental milestones last September were a cohort that were around about 12 to 24 months during COVID, and we did wonder whether that was part of it, with the learners in Quintile 1 probably having that greater support from organisations like Family First, our excellence and equity visits focusing on those, and also potentially benefiting from some of the additional 1140 hours. But at the moment, those are still sort of possible, and we'll continue to focus on that and make sure that all our learners are being supported well.
Okay, and the second question, you're right, Councillor Pragnell, that the survey is voluntary. So what we're looking at doing moving forward is, rather than waiting until the very end of the order, we will ask people to complete it during the last review. So with a sort of captive audience, so to speak. There are also literacy issues for some of the people that are doing the orders, so we're looking at planning more digital and technological approaches to try and support people to do that. But as I say, it is voluntary, and again, small numbers, but we have got an action plan around that.
Is that all of your questions, Councillor Pragnell? Oh, okay.
So, on page 43 of the combined report, it mentions the percentage of the adult population participating in physical activity, and the citizens panel shows a slight decrease, and it now remains below target. Do we know the reason for this, and is there a deeper dive needed on this aspect?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Pragnell. What we should point out here with the Citizens Panel is that it's based on self-reported survey responses, so it is about what people write in the survey. We also have to bear in mind that throughout the Citizens Panel survey itself, there are different confidence intervals with the different data through the questionnaire. So for that question, the confidence interval is plus or minus 4%, excuse me. So that might not be statistically reliable in terms of the drop you're seeing. I think we need to go back to some of the data around use of gyms, which has increased by 13% last year, and is meeting that target, exceeding their target. So I think we're not too concerned about that just now. Obviously, participating in physical activity is broader than just attending gyms and doing kind of sport activity. It might mean walking, etc. So we will look at trying to increase participation in things like that. And you'll see that when we get onto the item later on today's agenda about Place to Grow. The Live Well theme of Place to Grow is very much about this sort of thing and trying to enhance that and track where we're up to as a local authority. Thanks.
Does that complete your questions, Councillor Pragnell? Councillor Ireland and then Councillor McDonald, Councillor O'Donnell. And if there's anybody else, please let me know.
Thank you very much, Provost. I've got one comment and two questions for this paper. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you to the officers involved for the hard work. There was one thing that jumped out at me. It was the successful partnership approach that was coming over. I noted on it, it's paragraph 14 of page 29 that says, through a joint working approach, RAMH, Healthier Minds team, School Nursing, Children First and CAMS, there appeared to be a significant impact with 97% of children and young people supported, reporting improved mental health and well-being. I just thought that was a really good, and there was another nice piece that I liked in here as well, that it was saying that there were hopeful figures in the paper again on page 29, paragraph 19, and it says leisure centre visits had hit 8,565 per 10,000, I think, per 8,000 per 10, that can't be right. Anyway, it's a huge, it increased the number, I think I put my numbers down wrong, exceeding the target set with gym membership also up 13%, and I loved the fact that it said that library visits also continue to grow with 5,603 visits exceeding the target of 5,500 visits. So that was all really good. So I had two questions though that leapt out when I was reading it. The first one was that the recycling rates are still continuing to fall. On page 25, paragraph 25 I think it is, it's reported as now down to 56%. Now we're still above the Scottish average, and that's mentioned in the paper, but we're no longer sitting first in recycling rates. I think Moray and Scottish Borders have overtaken us. So I was wanting to ask, what are we as a council doing to combat this and return to our original rate of 67% that we had in 2020? And my second question, I noticed that the gender pay gap had increased. I worked out, I took the 2 years previous averages, and it should have been down closer to 3.66%, but it's increased to 4.9%. Has a reason been identified for that, and what actions are now to be put in place to counter it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ireland. As far as recycling is concerned, I'll ask Andrew Corey to answer that. The gender pay gap, I think, Louise, you could take that one. So start with Andrew, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, we reached 67% a few years ago. 67% was the highest figure ever attained by a council in Scotland. Unfortunately, since then, most councils have gone back the way in terms of recycling, mostly because of savings issues, I would say. So we've brought in a lot of initiatives to try and reduce our waste and hence make some savings in terms of what we're paying out overall in terms of the waste disposal budget. Waste disposal also risen as well. So we've had obviously appointment systems came in during COVID at the CA sites. We have the garden waste collections being charged for now. We had to do away with our recycling banks at various locations. And various other initiatives have kind of reduced our ability to get waste. Now waste, the more waste we get, the more chance we've got of recycling it. So the fact we've actually reduced our waste down, we have less to work with now. We also have a long-term 25-year contract with Viridor for our Clyde Valley Partnership waste, which is extremely good value for the council, but it limits our ability to seek out materials which we could have possibly looked at and isolated and got more out of the system. So I'm afraid we're kind of in decline, as most authorities are in terms of recycling, and really people will come back to us rather than us go ahead of them.
So, Councillor Ireland, I might need to speak to you separately about if you think you're calculating the gender pay gap a wee bit differently from us. I can get you to talk to somebody about that. It is quite a complex area, and I won't be able to go into the exact calculation. The gender pay gap is comparing the difference in an average hourly pay for male and female employees. And East Renfrewshire's average hourly rates of pay, our male employees are paid 4.9% more on average than our female employees. So in monetary terms, that's about £1 an hour, is what we're looking at. Our average hourly rates for both males and females are among the highest in Scotland, we know that. We calculate this really strongly in line with the local government benchmark framework and really have a look at how other people are calculating it. We know that the differences between East Renfrewshire and other councils can be caused by a number of factors, looking at the distribution of females compared to males within grades, salary scales and employees' length of service. So, for example, you will often find more of our new starts are female, and we have about 75% of our workforce is female, and they will start at the lower end of a pay grade. And then you'll have males who've maybe got longer service but are at higher ends of pay grades, and that's where you're starting to get that gap. So even if you look in terms of teachers, etc., and the new starts in teachers, they'll start at the bottom of the pay grade. So it's kind of driven by some of these factors every year, but it is quite complex. So I'm happy to pick that up with you afterwards and get somebody to talk to you about that calculation if that would suit. Thank you.
Anything else, Councillor Ireland? I'll now go to Councillor O'Donnell.
Thank you for getting my name right. That's much appreciated. Exactly. So it's more comment than questions. I think I would hope we all agree that this is another very good, very strong year-end performance reports across all departments. Luckily, this is something this council is getting used to. We shouldn't be complacent. It's constant hard work to keep to the standards that's been seen in this report. Clearly, education performance is leading the way in Scotland, and long may that continue. I wanted to pick up on a couple of points for credit, just because they don't normally get credit. First of all, it's paragraph 24. The percentage of roads requiring maintenance improvements is at the lowest level in 7 years. So well done to Andy Corr and his team, showing that capital investment of this and the prior administration is starting to have an impact. It's difficult to see in the numbers sometimes because of the way it's calculated, but that's really promising, so thanks for that. The second comment is really on street cleanliness levels, now at the highest since 2010-2011. That's a great performance, so thank you very much for that. And finally, to thank our police and fire colleagues, because this is about community planning and not just about council's performance in terms of the safety records of lowest crime rates in mainland Scotland and very low fire rates as well. So we commend the work with them, and that's obviously down to a lot of good, very close partnership working with our colleagues in police and fire. So I just wanted to make those comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Provost. Just picking up on what Councillor Ireland picked up on the improved use of our libraries, which I have to say comes as absolutely no surprise. I had the good pleasure last week of upping sticks from the council here, in which it was a lovely summer's day, and as you know, our room through there doesn't have a window to look at. So up sticks, went down to the library and used the facility down there, and I have to say it was lovely having the mother and child groups in the background having their sing-alongs. But not just that, I think what was particularly noticeable was just a general understanding, patience and assistance that the staff were giving to our elderly. It really was quite fantastic, and it's absolutely such an important hub, certainly in our community, and I'm sure it's reflected in all the libraries throughout East Renfrewshire, and I sincerely hope with the challenges that we have coming up that we don't lose sight of the importance of our libraries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Bamforth.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question, Paige? It's page 30 of the papers. I'm not sure what page it is in the... Anyway, it's item 26. In the past year, 69 additional affordable housing units have been delivered, which will have a wider positive impact. Can somebody clarify? I know we've built, it's incredible, and housing are under such severe pressure, and they're to be commended in all the work they're doing in providing our social housing, particularly in Maidenhill. But can somebody explain what these 69 additional affordable housing units are? Because I'm assuming that's not Maidenhill. Is that... yeah, could somebody explain what the different terminologies means? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Bamforth.
Mark.
Mark is going to answer this question. Thank you.
I'll certainly give it a go. Affordable housing has a range of different definitions, so it isn't what you might call solely your traditional council housing or social rent, as some people call it, but that also includes within that number housing that's delivered by our partners, so for Barrhead Housing Association, and it can include, for example, nominally things such as mid-market rent. So that's why it's called affordable, because it can be a range of different things, not just your traditional council housing and housing association tenancies. As in terms of Maidenhill, I think we're just right in saying we've just had the first handovers there. We had the first handover of 8 properties relatively recently, and the present time we are bringing forward, because we were originally going to bring forward something in the order of 50 units this year and 50 next year. At the present time, our target is to try and have all 105 handed over and occupied, certainly within this financial year and by the turn of early next year. Ideally, that is subject to slippage in terms of handover times and the snagging and so on and so forth, but that's what the current plan is at the minute. Hopefully that helps, but if you want to catch me afterwards, I'll be happy to give you any supplementary information.
Thank you very much to Mark Rogers for that answer. And Louise, you want to add to that? Thank you.
It was just to point out that on page 51 of the papers, there's a graph that shows the affordable housing, and it actually breaks down the 69 in the comments for it in terms of where those 69 were. So, thank you.
Councillor Bamforth, are there any further questions on this? No, all right, that's great, thank you. If there are no further questions, colleagues, can we agree the recommendations on page 27? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, thank you. Moving on to item 9, the Local Child Poverty Action Report, Year 6. So on pages 111 to 146. Louise Pringle, Director of Business Operations and Partnerships, and Julie Murray, Chief Officer of the Integration Joint Board, are both in attendance if there are any questions. Are there any questions, colleagues? I'll just take a note if you keep your hand up, please. So, Councillor Ireland, you were up first. Councillor Pragno and Councillor Morrison. Okay, in that order, Councillor Ireland first.
Thank you very much, Provost. It's page 113, paragraph 14, I think, cost of living. There have been some key areas of progress in relation to reducing the cost of living, and I wanted to thank the staff that have been working hard for implementing much needed support for the local families. One which in the paper popped out, it's obviously working extremely well, is the help for families who have faced increased fuel costs over recent years. I note that the support of a temporary energy advisor was actually is helping a large number of residents. I think it's 200 that they've helped, and this is obviously working. So I see that the paper then goes on to state some of these supports have and will come to an end. Is the provision, my question therefore is the provision of an energy advisor one of the supports which will no longer be supported by the Council?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Louise is going to answer this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ireland. We were able to use COVID temporary funding to put in a lot of additional supports round about some of these things that you've mentioned there at paragraph 14. So some of those initiatives are the ones that have come to an end. There was a post of an energy advisor in the Money Advice and Rights team that ended in March 2024. But we are still helping with energy and debt and charity applications through MART, but we refer more complex issues onto Home Energy Scotland. There is a temporary post that's a fuel/benefits advisor, which is trying to help a little bit in citizens' advice, and that's also temporarily funded, but only until March 25. So it's about being creative with the funding pots that both Money Advice and Rights and Citizens Advice can get. So there is still some support there. There is less support in terms of there was some temporary funding made available to help people with their fuel bills, and that had gone to Money Advice and Rights and CAB from COVID at the time. That has come to an end, but there still is some advice available for people. But again, these posts are very temporary and are due to come to an end next March. And it's really about what happens with these organisations is they have to be creative about where they can draw from temporary funding and work out where the best place to put that funding is in a year.
Councillor Island.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's good to hear that that's going on till March 25. Given what happened yesterday in the vote and the winter fuel payment being taken away, we might have some more people that are desperately needing help. So I'm hoping that people get sent and they get some advice from the MART team with that. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Councillor Pragnell.
Thank you, Provost. It's great to see examples of cooperation and interdepartmental working to support our residents. I have one question. I appreciate that throughout the report it mentions hidden poverty. However, I would like a bit of detail about the training that staff are going through to identify signs of hidden poverty, and we have to recognise that this is a sensitive topic and people sometimes don't want to ask for help. So how are staff being trained, and has hidden poverty, have you seen more hidden poverty? I presume yes, but what more can be done?
Thanks, Louise.
Yeah, we're certainly very aware of the issue of hidden poverty, and I think that is a very live issue in East Renfrewshire across all parts of the authority. We have developed a new poverty awareness training course for our frontline staff. That is going to launch next month, so we'll be training that will be delivered jointly by Money Advice and Rights team, the Citizens Advice Bureau and Work East Ren, so working with lots of our different frontline staff. We'll also be delivering presentations next month to primary and secondary head teachers and school equality coordinators as well, so that they have that awareness as well. And that's really that focus on how poverty can affect families more broadly. Might not always be obvious, and give them an overview of the support services that are available, because it's very much about trying to make sure we have a no wrong door approach, and that all of our frontline staff that come into contact with residents in East Renfrewshire can make sure they're signposted to the right places. We've had really good success in terms of working with our health visiting staff and Money Advice and Rights staff, and we've seen an increase in referrals coming from health visiting staff, which has been really helpful to us in that regard. Thanks.
Councillor Pragnell, finished with that? Okay, Councillor Morrison.
Yeah, thank you, Provost. My question's with respect to page 129 and the temporary funding for the support of emergency homeless accommodation. I appreciate those 52 households with dependent children who are having to spend time in emergency accommodation such as B&Bs. I'd appreciate that's contrary to the Council's own policy, but if there's no accommodation, there's no alternative but to put families up in B&Bs. So my question is really, what's the kind of the nature of the temporary accommodation, and is that temporary accommodation ring-fenced purely for families presenting as homeless with children? Thank you.
Matt Rogers can answer this. Thank you.
Thanks. There's a range of different types of accommodation that we use for housing people who we have a duty towards as homeless, or who we believe we may have a duty towards pending the outcome of an investigative process. It is true that hotels and bed and breakfast form a part of that, but there are limits to how long we can place individuals in that type of accommodation and still remain compliant with legislation and regulatory requirements. We also have a number of units of our own stock that we use for temporary accommodation purposes, and what we try to do is we try to prioritise placing families with children and those who are otherwise vulnerable into them first, and then move on people who have been in what would be deemed technically unsuitable accommodation, such as hotels and bed and breakfast, into there. The wider point you make on the general pressures is an accepted one, and I won't dwell on that at this point in time, if that's okay, because there is a substantive agenda item coming up later on.
Is it possible to come back to that, Provost?
Yes, please. If there's any other questions, please.
I totally agree with the remark there. I don't want to dwell too much on the homelessness issue, because I appreciate there is a more substantial paper on that to come. It was specifically on the point about families with dependent children and whether it would be considered that if they do have to go to a hotel or a B&B, that it would be a dedicated hotel or B&B for people with children, rather than single householders. That was all. Thank you.
Mark?
I think the difficulty with that is that people can present at any given point in time. You know, it's not unusual for people to present in the middle of the night or over the course of a weekend. The amount of hotel accommodation that is available to us is extremely limited, particularly within the boundaries of this authority, but actually more generally speaking. Homelessness staff and I were discussing this fairly recently. Certainly when there are big events on in Glasgow, you struggle to find anything within the city region area that's actually available on immediate demand, which is sometimes the case. So we don't have a specific location, for example, Hotel X or wherever that happens to be located, that we would place these families into. And in any event, what we would want to do is to minimise the amount of time that a family, particularly with dependent children, would spend in what we would deem, and indeed technically is, unsuitable accommodation, such as bed and breakfast and hotels. I'm afraid it is simply a matter that if someone presents to you at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, you place them where you can find them, and then you deal with that as soon afterwards by placing them in the type of accommodation that I've talked about, which is generally from within our own stock or house-type accommodation, as opposed to bed and breakfast. It's difficult. It depends literally on the day that someone presents and what is available at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to Mark Rogers, who is our Head of Housing and Property, for the responses to that item. Councillor O'Donnell.
I've got a few comments, but before I make those comments, just a plea to Mark. Could you speak closer to the microphone? In future, that would be great. Thanks. So on the poverty report, really welcome this report, and the partnership working really shines out through this report in terms of all the different activities that are going on throughout the council. It's good to see the drop in our poverty levels from 14.4% to 14%. This compares favourably with the national picture, which is flat at 24%, and is the best performing authority in Scotland in that regard. However, 3,000 children in poverty is still 3,000 too many, so we can't be complacent with that. It is really quite reassuring that our trend is going down, particularly when 2 years ago those who participated in the cost of living member officer working group will remember the predictions that our poverty levels would go up to 4,000 in the next 2 years. So that's not happened, and that's good to see. So there is some positive progress, but we cannot be complacent, as I said earlier. One final word of thanks, and I never thought I would say this in the council, is to Dolly Parton. Now, there's enough reason to thank Dolly Parton publicly, but for her work with the foundation and her delivery of free books for those children in care should be recommended, and that's a comment that was hidden away in the details of the books, but I think all council will support me in that. So thank you very much for a very good report. Thank you.
Well, she works very hard, 9 to 5, I'm advised. If there are no more questions, then can we agree the recommendations on page 111, colleagues? Agreed? Thank you. On to item 10, A Place to Grow, Strategic Vision and Community Plan, pages 147 to 170. And Louise Pringle, you're working really hard tonight. Louise, not that you don't work hard every night and every other officer, you're certainly leading in all these issues tonight. So Louise will answer any questions, so I'll open it up to colleagues if there are any questions on this. Thank you, Councillor Ireland.
It's a comment It was actually just to say thank you to Louise and her team for the hard work that's been done on the paper. What shone through for me was an ambition for East Wren, and I really liked that. So I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you, and that I'm really looking forward. I'm really looking forward to the conference with sort of local residents and trying to get people involved that way. I think it is March next year. It was floated as a possibility, but I'll keep an eye for the updates. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for the ambition in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Donnell.
I'm just going to echo Councillor Ireland's comments here, and it's important to talk about this report here. There's been a huge amount of work on this over the last 18 months or so, and as Councillor Ireland has said, and actually all council members have been involved with this as well, so it's really good to see a vision here that has input not just from councillors but from the wider community planning partnership, that is actually a statement of intent for the next 15 years, and that's really good to see. It's very coherent. I think it's very easy to explain and to articulate, and I really appreciate the work that's been done on this. And obviously, you know, this isn't a static document. It will change over time. Hopefully not all the time it will change, because the key thing is to have a constancy of our mission and vision for the future and the long-term view of where we're going. So I'd just like to appreciate all the work that's gone into to deliver this document today. Thank you.
Very much, and I expect that you speak for all of us and the commendations and praise there. Councillor Pragnell.
Thank you. It was just to add to what Councillor O'Donnell has said, and also to thank the communications team for really bringing the graphics. And I think when this does go out to public and when the public are involved in the community conference, that it makes it really easy to visualise, and everyone likes bright colours, and I think the graphics are excellent throughout the report. So thanks to all those who in the communication team who have worked on this, as well as Louise's team. It's much appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no more questions or comments from anybody, can we agree the recommendations on page 147? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to item 11 is the calendar of meetings 2025, which are on pages 171 to 174. The Chief Executive is in attendance if there are any questions on this item. Councillor Wallace, first of all.
Thank you, Provost. I wonder if I might ask, I'm looking at the budget meeting that we have in February. I certainly recall in years gone by, I can't remember the exact year, we had about 2 or 3 changes to that date because of the horse trading that was going on at Holyrood at the time. And I'm just wondering, just with the rather precarious situation the Scottish Government is in just now, in terms of getting a majority vote through as to whether or not, I'd like to know, when is the last possible time for us to actually have that meeting, and whether it's maybe preferable to go for that, so that we're not kind of coming and going, as it were. Thanks.
Okay, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace, for your question. I actually did a bit of work on this today, because I know that it may well have come up, and a lot of it is really down to getting out our council tax bills, and our revenue and benefits team but able to deliver on that. We have a statutory obligation where we have to give people a required length of notice when we're going to change someone's direct debit amount that they're going to pay. In addition to that, for them to know that, they have to have their bill, and we have to go to our printers to get those bills printed, put in envelopes and mailed out to our constituents and our communities. So I had looked at that today, and I had asked the question, would the following Wednesday still allow that to happen? And the Revenue and Benefits team have come back to me and said it wouldn't. It wouldn't give the opportunity. In the first instance, we already have a date block booked with the printing company, and as you'll appreciate, there's only so many printing companies, and they are doing this work obviously across for a number
of local authorities. We would then lose that space. We would probably go towards the back of the queue. That would cause an issue. But in actual fact, they went back and looked, and the following Wednesday actually doesn't give them the necessary time to do all of that preparatory work, test, because we obviously have to test when we put a new amount out, do the tests, get all that printing done, get it out to our communities at a time that still gives them enough statutory time to see that their direct debit is going to change. So that's why we're stuck with the Wednesday, I think it's the 28th of February, is that right with that? 26th, whatever it is, sorry. It's the Wednesday night anyway, so the following one just doesn't work for us. So that's the reasons, Councillor.
Anything else, Councillor Wallace?
No.
Okay.
Could I come in?
Councillor O'Donnell, Councillor Buchanan and Councillor Bamforth.
And my guess is Councillor Buchanan is going to say what I'm going to say is really about the budget meeting. So what the Chief Executive said is absolutely right for the council tax. So and I think in previous years we have split agreement of the council tax rate from the main budget. Now that's a fallback. No one wants to be doing 2 budget meetings, let's face it, if we can at all avoid it. So there is possibility of splitting the meeting to have council tax earlier, and if there is still a lot of noise going on in terms of final settlement of numbers, to defer that. Clearly it's best practice to get it in the diary now. Let's hope that everything that we have enough information to make a decision at that point, but that there is some flexibility in that, not that we want to call on it, certainly not at this stage.
Before I bring any colleagues in, I'll ask the Chief Executive to respond, thanks, or add to what's already been said.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, we'd be happy to do that if members are okay with setting that date at the moment, pending, of course, having the necessary information that allows us to set a budget. But we could, as you're absolutely right, we could, if necessary, at that time, if members were agreeing to that we set the date at the moment as it stands, with the knowledge that we may have to change it for the budget part, if indeed we don't have the necessary information. Members are okay with that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buchanan, Councillor Bamforth and Councillor Wallace, if you want to come back in again from what you've heard and your question, but at the moment, Councillor Buchanan.
Yeah, no, it was just to make that very point that it can be split and the decisions can be made independently of one another. Council tax can be agreed in advance and then everything else looked at.
Councillor Bamforth.
Reiterate that and say the same question, because I think, as Councillor Wallace will recall, we have done that before.
Could you speak through the chair, please, to have unanimity? Councillor Wallace, is there anything you want to add? It was your original question that prompted. Well, I'm being generous, I'm being nice. Take it while you get it. It doesn't happen very often. Okay, so if there are no more questions or points on that, can we agree the recommendations on page 171? Agreed? Thank you very much. Item 12, Capelrick House Programme Update is on pages 175 to 178. Michaela Sullivan is the Head of Environment and Mark Ratter as Director of Education are both in attendance if there are any questions. Are there any questions? Councillor Bamforth, Councillor Ireland and Councillor Buchanan, are you indicating you want to speak? No? Okay then. Councillor Bamforth first.
Thank you very much. I'm very disappointed, not disappointed in the council in this. I'm very disappointed at Children First because, as Julie will recall, we've done a lot of work over the years with Children First, particularly when we did the presentation and got £1 million, the highest ever award from the Robertson Trust for the Family Wellbeing Service. So I'm very, very disappointed in Children First, and I just wondered if we had any reason why they have pulled out of this. I don't know, maybe it's something commercially sensitive that can't be divulged, but I have to say I know we have something, an alternative in place, but I think this Barna House was such an innovative and fantastic facility that I'm really disappointed in it. Well, in the situation we're now in.
Okay, I'll ask the Chief Executive to respond. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bamforth. I think, and probably would all accept that given the financial challenges that all of us face, and unfortunately that also includes charities, that Children First, where they believed that there would be funding in place to support certain things, they were no longer, I believe, able to get that funding, and therefore they had to come to the conclusion that they could no longer fulfil that commitment. I don't believe they're in any different a place to many other charities across the country. They have to make their decisions based on what they believe best, but ultimately I'm guessing they would need the funding to do that, and they came back to and said unfortunately they don't have it.
Councillor Ireland.
Thank you very much. Councillor Banforth has ticked off one of my questions. You'll be pleased to hear. There were several questions that popped out when I was reading this. I think one of the main ones was that from the 2021 paper, I think it was 440,000 was requested for this, and then there was an April 23 paper where it was 1.2 million the cost had gone up to. But that 1.2 million was based on the fact that the construction costs for the refurbishment of the building had increased, but that had gone up to 2.3 million, with Children First supposed to take up the difference between the 1.2 and the 2.3. So there is no comment on that in this paper, and my question, I suppose, is has Children First put up that money already to bridge that gap? Is the council putting up that money now to bridge that gap to get to the 2.3 million? I just want to get a clear idea of what is now happening with that, because that figure has been reported to us previously, and I want to know where this additional spend is coming from, and I want to know. And I'm going to apologise in advance, and I don't normally do because if this sounds rude to any of the officers, but we've got a contract here that was awarded, or a lease that didn't go through. So was the contract awarded before the lease was signed off? Were we very sure at the time that we were getting the lease signed off? So sure that we moved ahead with the contract? It's just a lot of money that the council is now having to spend on this building, and we don't have a use for it yet. So I just want to make sure we're not in an even bigger hole than is in this paper. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll ask Stephen Quinn, the Chief Executive, to respond as far as you can on this.
Thank you, Councillor Ireland, and my apologies if I'm not going back a number of years for you. Obviously I can only pick it up from a certain period of time, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. The contract that we have and is due for completion, if not completed now or thereabouts, was for the external works on the building. With it being a list A building, we were ultimately under an obligation as a local authority to ensure that we maintain that building. That building needed significant work on the external features of it. That is the contract that was put in place, you will see, I think, from the perhaps the April 23 paper you referred to, which I think was for 1.2 million. That has come in on budget. There is no additionality required for that. So that will secure the external works to the building. For the building to become fully functional, obviously the internal works would be required. I believe that is where the £1.1 million would have come from, because at that time it would have been estimated that to refurb and do the work inside the building to the standard and for its expected use was estimated to be 1.1 million. So that work has not been done, and there was no resource, no money or anything else with Children's First, because obviously they withdrew from the project, and therefore the internal work has not been done. What we would now need to do as a council, and that's why the paper tonight goes through uses that we believe the building could be put to. Some of them I believe are actually very good and would enhance the work we do in the council, and especially for our children and young people, and indeed young adults. What we're asking for this evening is essentially a steer from council. Is that the type of thing that you would see as being a reasonable and a well used for that building, which we have to have? And if it is, we will then go away and do further work of working that up to, okay, we would use it for X, and here is an estimated cost. But yes, you're absolutely right. Ultimately, it would still need to be a cost to the internal fit out of that building. I've not put a price on that because I don't know what that would be at this stage, but it would be significant, as you'll understand.
Councillor Ireland?
Oh, no, just to say thank you very much, and I'll keep an eye for any further reports coming forward. Thank you.
Councillor Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. I can't disagree with the comments of the previous two speakers, but we find ourselves well where we are, and I think what the Chief Executive said there gives a kind of positive way forward for using this building for community good. And I just wanted to ask two questions, therefore. On page 177, the first bullet point there, one of the proposed uses of the building is offering of storage space to local volunteer groups. I suppose the question is, why only storage space? Can we go further, perhaps, in offering accommodation or use of the building for more purposes than storage for voluntary groups? And the second question is around, it happens to be on the grounds of a high school. So is there anything that education can do in terms of working with young people at Eastwood High to see what ideas they have, perhaps, for providing facilities for young people, young adults, as the Chief Executive said? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. In respect of your first point, we have had a few volunteer groups who have actually come to us recently about storage, because it's not an easy thing to come across in East Renfrewshire. Getting a building in East Renfrewshire is not an easy thing. I don't need to tell any of you that. So that is one of the things we will look at, because any building that we have to ensure, and I would absolutely, especially in regard to this building, is ensure we're using it as much as possible. So whilst some of the planning is there around, would we use it for school use? But schools finish at maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. How do we design an interior space that is used as long and as often as we possibly can into evenings and at weekend? And of course, if you design it appropriately, then that can and should incorporate community use, both during the day, where there is space and it's safe to do so, and indeed in the evening and at the weekend. So absolutely, anything we would do here would take into account using it, allowing the community to get as much use of it as we possibly can, so that it is used as often as possible. I'll defer to Mark if you're okay, in respect of bringing in and getting the thoughts of young people, which I think is a good idea, but I wouldn't jump in and let him do that bit.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. We've had discussions with the head teacher, but given that at this stage it was still about exploring the possibilities, we haven't taken that further. I suppose at this point it was about trying to scope out some of those opportunities and just setting out those broad themes. What I would say is we've tried to link that to one of the previous papers, if you think about the place to grow, and some of those themes that were coming through, both in the flourishing and in the thriving part, both the economic development, but also those wider achievements for young people, and some of those groups which perhaps we don't support as well as possible, some of that transition for young learners that have got particular support needs. There are possibilities there. So all of those would be possible, and if, depending on where we go with this, that would be that sort of consultation would be what we would want to do next.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Finish with that, Councillor Morrison. Councillor Buchanan, then Councillor Redland.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Just to echo some of those remarks, I'm happy to note the improvement work and the renovation work that has taken place to make the building usable again. And I very much welcome the idea of some sort of social enterprise, which could be beneficial, particularly in areas of around delivering for our young workforce, etc., and the training aspects and the needs that we may be able to take forward. And I think there's probably some scope there that we can look at with education, with our employability teams, etc., and investigate what could be done, both providing a service as well as a training opportunity for many of our young people.
Thank you, Councillor Buchanan. Councillor Redland.
I don't know if I realise the positioning of Capelwick House within school grounds makes it rather challenging for full commercialisation of the property, but it is a very, very attractive house with significant architectural merit. And I'm bearing in mind that in East Dunbartonshire, I think it is, that Kilmerdinny House, which is owned by the council there, has been used for an art gallery and a social venue that's rented out. And there could be potential for that for Capelwick House. I know it's in the school grounds, which makes it more challenging, but I think it could be done. And I wonder if consideration could be given in referring the building or consultations with East Renfrewshire Culture and Leisure to see if they could take it on, to see if there could be some commercialisation of the building for the benefit of the council and its residents.
Mark Ratter, Director of Education, please.
I think that's a very, very helpful point. We have had discussions with the Chief Exec of the Culture and Leisure Trust. You'll be aware that they obviously run the likes of the cafe over the road at the theatre. That's also as essentially as close to St Ninian's High School as Capelwick House is to Eastwood High School. So there are ways to manage those things that would certainly be possible. So we're in those discussions with the likes of Culture and Leisure. I think the part of the proposals going forward will need to do those full options appraisals in terms of making sure that we've got clear business cases to bring back to members in terms of how much each of those things would cost. And we've got that clarity for members going forward, given that need to make sure we've got best value for the council.
Thanks, Mark. Finished, Councillor Edlin? Is that enough?
Thank you, Councillor.
All right. Thank you very much. So if there are no more questions, can we agree the recommendations on page 175? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 13, outline of pressures facing homelessness, pages 179 to 186. And we have Mark Rogers, Head of Housing and Property, in attendance if there are any questions. Are there any questions, colleagues? Councillor Wallace, Councillor Ireland.
Thank you, Provost. Declarations seem to be becoming something of a habit in these parts. I seem to recall we had the climate emergency declaration in October 21, and by crikey, with the summer we've just had, we can see what effect that declaration had. We then had the Conservative cost of living emergency declaration in September 22, where it stated, under this government, people are seeing tax hikes and petrol and food prices rising drastically, along with energy bills soaring. And I'm sure the irony of that was not lost on even the SNP who proposed it, with the removal of the winter fuel payment by the, so I believe, non-Conservative UK and Scottish governments. Political posturing at its best. As such, I'm not entirely in favour of council chamber making declarations, but there may be something with this particular one, and certainly with 12 other authorities now declaring such an emergency, we could perhaps be guilty of being a little late to the party. I do note on page 183 it's stated that Scottish Government's vision is that everyone to have a safe, good, quality and affordable home that meets their needs in the place they want to be. Now, with ERC having the title of being the top local authority area in which to live, is it any wonder that the removal of the local connection test that we have a problem? Couple this with the situation now where declaring yourself homeless puts you at the top of the housing list, then we perhaps have a very serious problem, and not necessarily of our own making, and perhaps we are being victims of our own success. Could I ask, on that basis, this is legislation and changes and guidelines, etc., that are coming from on high, particularly from Scottish Government, could I ask what funding we receive from Scottish Government to offset these changes in legislation that puts authorities such as ours under such pressure? Thank you.
Who do you want to answer this? Margaret, could you answer that question, please? Do you want to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Would you like the answer to the question to be repeated?
Am I right in saying the question was on additional funding specifically for the changes? I'm not aware of any additional funding specifically for those changes. I believe that we have our general funding, and that we have support for part of the cost of providing new housing units, but funding specific to the changes that the councillor referenced isn't something that we've seen coming through.
So, Councillor Wallace, it was the local connection specifically you were asking. Was there additional money for that, or was there additional aspects that you were asking? Was there additional? I'll bring Mark Rogers in a second. I just want to clarify your question.
The question was that there have been changes in legislation nationally that has a direct impact on us locally. And I'm asking whether or not, with these changes in legislation, does this council receive additional funding as a result of the decision making that was made in Scottish Government that is putting us under such severe pressure? Thank you.
I'll ask Mark Rogers to respond to that. Thanks.
So, in a word, no. But you are right to highlight the challenges that people can present anywhere they wish these days with the removal of that connection. But the obligation on the council, as is set out in the report, is that temporary accommodation, indeed opposite permanent accommodation, do require to be within our boundaries. So that does present a particular pressure for this authority.
Councillor Wallace?
I wonder if I could perhaps propose that the Chief Executive sends a letter to the First Minister to request that we do get additional funding in order to tackle this issue that we have locally. Thank you.
I would require a seconder for any proposal. Councillor O'Donnell?
Just to respond to Councillor Wallace's point, we did write to the First Minister on that very point last week, asking for clarity on, in the programme for government, there was a number of new measures, new funding available. Unclear if this was incremental or part of what was already been previously announced. We've asked for that. We've also asked for clarification. We've asked for a review on the rules around local connection to understand the implications of that policy nationally, to see it, how that's working, if it's not working. So we've asked for a review of that. I'd be happy to share that with members, the letter that has already gone to the First Minister on that point. I don't see there being any problem with sharing that with all members. It's in the public domain. Just to a couple of the other points that Councillor Wallace mentioned earlier, in particular around declaring an emergency and why we're doing it. No one wants to declare a housing emergency for the sake of it, right? It's political posturing unless there's an action plan behind it. Our officers have been doing a lot of work over the last number of months to deliver a credible action plan. And I would actually commend Councillor Danny Devlin, who's been shouting and screaming about this issue for some time now, and for his work in highlighting it and making sure that we've got a credible response, which I think we do. It won't solve it. It won't solve it quickly, but it starts moving a dent into our homelessness numbers. Part of the challenge and part of the comments in the letter to the First Minister is to do with the cut to the housing supply grant. It's 25%. It has had a significant impact on our scheduling. We've been lucky to be able to accelerate Maidenhill into this year, but some of our other projects have had to be pushed back because of that cut in funding. I don't think that's acceptable when nationally a housing emergency has also been declared. But we will keep lobbying on that front. And most importantly, we are not alone in this, right? We are now the 12th to declare this, and it's in all parts of Scotland, from the borders to Argyll and Bute, places you wouldn't normally imagine having an issue, and across central Scotland and the major conurbations, as you'd probably expect. As the paper has outlined, there's a number of very specific characteristics in East Renfrewshire, which is making it much more difficult for us. Most of our housing is privately owned. It's the highest privately owned stock in Scotland. That conversely means that we've got amongst the lowest number of social housing available for tenants. And our private rented market is relatively immature compared to that seen nationally, and is, quite frankly, is unaffordable for the vast majority of our residents. So we do have unique factors that are playing against us. We're also finding that our tenants, quite rightly, it's their choice, are staying put. They're not moving on to new properties at the rate that they once did. So that means that the opportunities for temporary accommodation is much lower, and is meaning that we have to look at hotels and bed and breakfasts. And that is why we were on the Scottish Housing Regulators list of the 8 authorities in Scotland that are at risk of systemic failure. Systemic failure means that not being able to put people that are homeless into proper temporary accommodation, meaning not hotels or B&Bs, which none of us want to do. And I think as part of that action plan dealing with some council buyback of ex-council properties will help that. It won't solve it overnight by any means, but it's start of that progress. So I want to reassure members, this isn't about making any sort of political point. The real importance of this is having a credible action plan, making sure that full council is behind this action plan, and that we join up our activities. And this is not just a housing revenue account issue. This is not just an issue for Mark and for Suzanne and for the officers dealing with housing on a day-to-day basis. It's something that we all need to get behind. So I hope that gives some reassurances on those matters.
That's very helpful, Councillor O'Donnell. Councillor Wallace, does that satisfy your wish for a letter to be sent to the Scottish Government?
Well, given that it's already taken place, yes. I would certainly be very interested in seeing the response if and when we ever get one. Thank you.
Councillor Ireland, then Councillor Morrison.
Thank you very much, Provost. I've just got one quick question on the paper, but just prior to that, it's a wee bit of, through yourself to Councillor Wallace, when he was saying the climate emergency declaration, suggesting it was possibly useless. I would point out that the next paper that's coming up is the LDP3 paper, and specifically the climate emergency that was declared in this chamber is highlighted several times and is sort of helping form the way forward. So it is something that helps form things in the council.
You might want to make that point when we come to that item on the agenda.
No, it was just ahead of it, just to clarify that.
All right, thank you.
My one question I had is on page 182, and it was one of the actions to address increasing levels of homelessness is listed as capital investment to increase local supply by utilising modular type accommodations subject to relevant consents being obtained. Now, I looked up this, and I know that it looks like there's 33 schemes across the UK that are already, across 22 local authorities that are already in place. 27 use prefabricated modular units, and 6 use converted shipping containers. Do you have any information on what these modular units would potentially be and where they might potentially be sited? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Mark Rogers to respond. Thank you.
It's a good question, and actually a number of the options are exactly those that you've been talking about. So in the previous life at my last authority, we had similar issues in terms of temporary accommodation while we were building housing for teachers on our remote islands. And so, in that instance, we got what looks rather like a holiday home that you would see in a caravan park, comes in two halves, shipped it out, bolted it together, and there you go. Shipping containers are another example that have been used. There are other forms of modular accommodation. Indeed, there's a project out in Granton in Edinburgh, the City of Edinburgh, run for a number of years, which is exactly on that basis, a plot of land that is serviced to which temporary accommodation units have been placed. So I think it's part of our overall strategy. You heard earlier on talk about investing to buy houses on the open market from Councillor O'Donnell. We're also looking at the range of buildings that the council owns to ask the question about whether or not those that may not have any medium to long-term future may be potentially something that we might be able to convert. You will have to be open-minded. There isn't one size fits all. As for land on which you might put what you might call temporary or demountable units, I would have to have a conversation with my colleague to the left about any issues in relation to planning consents. So there is that element of it, and the sites would have to be serviced. But I think we have to start by saying what are the buildings and the land that we own and to what purposes may they be used, and then we can have a conversation about what type of accommodation needs to be procured and placed on that land. And that was the whole point of me saying subject to necessary consents and warrants, etc., because we do have to make sure that that has been done appropriately, and that indeed we take into account concerns of local ward members in doing that. So before we get down to even thinking about putting anything in the ground, there would be absolutely a conversation with local ward members about any implications that might arise from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Does that conclude your questions, Councillor Ireland?
Yes, and thank you to Mark.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Provost. In terms of the declaration of an emergency, that doesn't strike me as being particularly political. I mean, of the 11 councils before East Renfrewshire doing this, there's a variety of different stripes of political leadership within those councils, including two Conservative controlled councils. The fact that an emergency has been declared is not political, but I'm afraid the cause is political, and we see that in the £200 million reduction to the affordable housing budget from the Scottish National Government. Now, to that £200 million broadly equates to the overspend on the Kilmarnock Ferry project, and it's 2/3 of the overspend on the new Brylliny prison in Glasgow. So we can very clearly see where the money that should be coming to local authorities for affordable housing is going instead. And I'm afraid that's just a point of fact. Now, what that does lead us to consider is what can we actually do about it with the levers we have. And I'd like to ask, is there any kind of analysis of the types of units of housing that East Renfrewshire currently has within its council stock, such as flatted developments versus terraced, fauna block? And is there any consideration around what the cost per unit would be? For example, if we could build more flatted developments for social let, would that allow us to get more units built for people who are currently waiting, crying out for a house, for the same sum of money? Because clearly we're going to need to make the money we are getting and the support that we are getting from national government, we're going to have to do things to make that money go further. Thank you.
If you could respond to that, please. Thank you.
It's a good question, and I would welcome the opportunity to have a more detailed conversation perhaps outside of here. In terms of the constituent parts of our existing stock, yes, we can provide a breakdown of what we have by flatted types, foreign block, etc., etc. And indeed we'll be bringing forward to future meetings our local housing strategy and social housing investment plan, and that will then talk about the numbers of outputs and the partners that will be involved in delivering those outputs. And there is an assessment that we carry out in terms of strategic housing need, which identifies very roughly what type of stuff we need to build and in what area, etc., etc. I mean, it is true to say that some forms of construction, certain housing archetypes, do have differential costs to provide them, but there are a range of other issues that actually also impact on that cost to construct, not the least of which is the location of the land and its availability in the first place, so therefore the price of it, and also sometimes indeed in terms of abnormalities that you might find when you start to develop a site like previous industrial use, etc. So it's not necessarily always as simple as suggesting that a 1 or 2 bedroom house might necessarily be cheaper per unit than a 4 or a 5. It is very much situationally dependent, but I'd be happy to have a conversation with you around these issues and indeed the breakdown of our stock outside of here.
That would be much appreciated. Thank you, Provost. I would be delighted to meet with Mark Rogers to discuss that. Just for clarity, I'm not talking about the kind of multi-storey high-rise type of flats. I'm talking about the kind of the tenements and the closes, which I suspect many of us would have grown up in ourselves as children. as part of the family. So that's the kind of general gist of what I'm getting at. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. So, Councillor Bamford, I think I noticed you and Councillor Lundy.
Since we're not being political, I would just point out that the root cause of this is nothing to do with ferries. It's to do with Margaret Thatcher in 1980 selling off the council house stock and not allowing councils to retain the funding to replenish that stock. That is the root cause. As any sociologist or any housing expert will tell you, that's when it started. And I agree it's a terrible situation. I can't imagine how distressing it is for people. However, when Councillor O'Donnell talked about how it's prevalent in Scotland, this is a UK-wide problem. You only have to turn on the news or listen to the radio and hear it. And in the figures that have been provided by housing, there's been overall in Scotland a 10% increase in homelessness. Last month in England it was 16%. That's the figures from the UK government, or the English government, the UK government, pertaining to English figures. So we are not unique. It still doesn't detract from the situation we're in. However, to try and portray it as a ferries problem or a problem to do with the Scottish Government is just disingenuous, to say the least.
Councillor Lundy.
Yeah, my question's relating to mid-market rent, and I would like to find out a bit more information. I know, as the leader said, one of the reasons that there's so many people presenting as homeless is because they can't afford privately rented accommodation in the area. I know that there's a project running from Barhead Housing Association, I think it's called Vesta by Barhead Housing, and the interest in that has been extreme, really. They're inundated with people interested in these units. So I was wondering if there was any prospect of any other mid-market rent opportunities on the horizon.
Wishes to come in before I bring Mark in on this?
I'm really glad you raised that point of mid-market rent. Mark can talk more about this, but we had an excellent presentation last week, I think it was last week, on the survey of mid-market rent opportunities within East Renfrewshire. As you'd expect, huge demand, huge possibilities on that. The key thing for us is, what is our role in terms of provision or facilitation of mid-market rent? But it's clearly a huge opportunity that we should be looking at seriously. But I'll perhaps pass on to Mark to talk a little bit more about that, if that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah, it's an important point. I mean, if we are able to expand the amount of mid-market rent that is available, it reduces demand on social housing, so that provides more opportunities for people who are perhaps arguably more extreme needs to be able to be housed. We did have a good conversation with Barhead Housing, and I'm in conversations with a couple of external companies and individuals at the present time about opportunities both for mid-market rent housing and also in terms of some of our temporary social housing challenges. So those conversations are going on in the background. I suppose the important thing is that housing across all tenures being delivered really does help in terms of the significant pressures we've got in terms of homelessness. So mid-market rent is very much a part of that. And yes, Barhead have done some great work on that. We've had some really productive conversations with them recently about housing delivery across all tenures, and I'm hopeful we'll take that forward in the future. As ever, the big challenge for East Renfrewshire is not the unwillingness of people to be involved in building this and taking a partnership approach. One of the points I'm often struck by is nobody cares who builds a house. They want us all to work together as a sector, public, private, third sector, to deliver those solutions. The challenge for East Renfrewshire is it's a small geographical footprint with not much land that is available. That which is available is expensive and often needs a lot of remediation to bring it forward. Those are the challenges, but I can assure you, those conversations are active and ongoing, and hopefully that helps give you some comfort on that point.
Thank you very much, Mark. Councillor Buchanan, and from this point I'm only taking additional new speakers. I'm not going back to anybody who's spoken before. Councillor Buchanan.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Yeah, just to note a number of the questions have been asked, and happy to approve the recommendations in the paper. I think it's the right way forward. And I think as we were on a maritime theme, it would be interesting to know how many houses could have been built across the UK
had 2 aircraft carriers, one of which has been demolished to keep the other one going and ultimately doesn't have any aircraft on it, could have been built given the savings that could have been realised here. But that's just another aside. Thank you.
Before anybody else comes up with opportunity costs ideas, if there are no further additional comments or questions, then can we agree the report? No, Councillor Wallace has been in already. I'm not taking any new contributions, sorry. So can we agree the report? Agreed? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Cunningham, and everybody else as well. Item 14 is the Local Development Plan 3 Evidence Report, pages 187 to 1020. Here we go, says Councillor Cunningham.
That's me, aye.
You could have put that to music, Councillor Cunningham. So, there will be a presentation in this item on screen, and also there are printed copies available. And I believe the copies have also been sent out to the members who are online. So I will invite Michaela Sullivan to start the presentation when she's ready, and we're all ready to follow with our paper copies. So whenever you're ready, Michaela. Are we all ready, everybody? Okay. Are you sitting comfortably? Right, Michaela, you can begin.
Good evening, Provost and members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about the forthcoming Local Development Plan. The Local Development Plan will be LDP 3, and this will be the first plan prepared under the new system that was introduced by the 2019 Town and Country Planning Scotland Act. Members will recall that they approved a development plan scheme for this plan back in April 2024, which set out a timetable under which we are working. Preparation of the local development plan includes 3 key stages, and we are currently at stage 1, which is the evidence gathering and gate check stage. Following on from this, there will be preparation of the new LDP, which will involve discussion and consultation with a wide variety of groups across the council, children and young people, and other interested parties. There will then be the formal consultation process that we have to go through, examination of the plan by a reporter appointed by the Scottish Ministers, and finally adoption. And then the third stage will be delivery of that adopted local development plan here in East Renfrewshire. The evidence gathering stage has been going on now for a period of over a year, and that has led to a suite of topic papers which we have structured around the core themes of the adopted National Planning Framework 4. Those core themes are sustainable, livable and productive places. And we've divided then those themes into 26 broad topics which reflect the topics that come up in the National Planning Framework. These are a wide range from housing, economic development, flood risk, soil, mining, all manner of different topics that have to be considered. We went to public consultation on these topics back in April and May of this year. Sorry, apologies, I have not moved the slide. Sorry. So we went to public consultation back in April and May of this year, and so we received responses which enabled us to identify the areas of dispute. And I put the word in inverted commas because I think it's an unfortunate piece of terminology that comes from the legislation, and I would prefer difference to be the way that we view these comments. Gate check is then an independent assessment of the evidence in front of a reporter appointed by the Scottish Ministers, who will review the sufficiency of the evidence and will assess the disputes or differences. The evidence report that we have prepared is a collaborative and place-based approach to planning and infrastructure. Because of the wide variety of data that has to be gathered from such a large range of different sources,
It must be interpreted as a moment in time. So at the point at which we went to public consultation, we ceased to gather further data and settled on the body of data that you have before you. It's in the nature of such things that there will be rolling and iterative changes as we go along. However, we do have the opportunity, if members agree, to make any minor amendments that have been picked up before we submit the reports of the Scottish Ministers, and there is a request for delegation to the Director in that regard. The document provides a full overview of the East Renfrewshire Council area and basically identifies to us what we need to plan for. So that will then be used to inform the next stage, which will be the proposed plan. Members are asked today to note the findings of the evidence report and then approve that officers may submit that report to the Scottish Ministers to go into the gate check process. As I've said, extensive engagement has informed the evidence report. We've taken account of a range of the views of a range of specific groups and also what arose from the public consultation. We consulted council departments, children and young people, and key agencies such as Scottish Water and Nature Scot, as well as the people that chose to respond through the public consultation. There are a small number of key themes that arise in the disputes over the sufficiency of the evidence, and these relate to the identification and review of greenbelt boundaries, housing requirements and existing housing need, education analysis and projection methodology, and this is all about whether or not when you build new homes, large numbers of children tend to come into those, and then you quite often see a tailing off of the numbers. However, in some of the data that we have here in East Renfrewshire, that's not actually happening. So there's a debate over the number of school places that may be required in the future. There's a dispute over the scope for development contributions towards healthcare infrastructure, and the views of some are that GP practices operate as commercial entities and therefore developer contributions shouldn't be used to fund GP infrastructure, and then the obvious counter to that is that if new housing development is putting demands on GPs, then why should the infrastructure not be paid for as a consequence of that demand and through Section 75? And finally, there's a dispute over site assessment methodology. It would take all night to go through all of those different things and explain them in great detail, and I don't suppose anybody wants me to. However, I have identified the area that perhaps is the one that causes most concern, and that is the topic of housing. So I propose just to give a little more information on the housing numbers and the dispute that has arisen around those. So topic paper 13 sets out the methodology that we've used to establish a 10-year housing land requirement as an obligation that we have to put forward under the plan. So the National Planning Framework identifies minimum all 10-year housing land requirement with the accent on the minimum. And that methodology, the methodology that was used for that, brought a number of 2,800 homes that have to be met in the East Renfrewshire Council area. As with all these things, we like to take an evidence-based approach, and the team have worked through the housing needs and demand assessment and local housing strategy to identify infrastructure, funding constraints and so on. Our housing needs and demand assessment has been reviewed by the Scottish Government and has been determined to be robust and credible. That proposes a requirement of 3,100 homes, which is an 11% increase on the minimum figure set out in the National Planning Framework. And that 3,100 homes, as I say, has been assessed as robust and credible by the Scottish Government through the Housing Needs and Demands Assessment process. So we are proceeding on the basis of a 3,100 home requirement over the 10 years of the new local development plan. Not all of these homes will be new allocations because we carry forward some of the allocations on the existing sites in LDP2. So there's a constant rolling monitoring of the homes being delivered under LDP2, and as we move into the LDP3 process, we will have a good idea of the number of additional homes we have to allocate in order to satisfy the needs through the 10-year housing land requirement for LDP3. Homes for Scotland's analysis has proposed an alternative figure of approximately 13,800 homes. We need to take this very carefully because they're not actually suggesting that 13,800 homes need to be built in East Renfrewshire in the next 10 years. And even if they were to suggest that, there is no way that they could possibly deliver that as an industry body. So what they've sought to do is to pick up on the methodology that has been used in order to assess housing needs and demand. And they've undertaken their own assessment of households in some kind of housing need to highlight the fact that there's a problem or there's a difference between the way the housing needs and demand assessment identifies need and what they would consider to be the actual need for housing in Scotland. So it's not a request to allocate that number of houses, it's to highlight the problem and the differences that arise as a consequence of that. As I've said, our housing needs and demand assessment follows the accepted methodology prescribed by the Scottish Government and has been assessed. So therefore, we feel confident that although we go into the gate check process with this dispute, the reporter will look at the accepted methodology and is likely, very likely, to come to the same conclusion that we have and agree that 3,100 homes is the appropriate level that we should be targeting in East Renfrewshire. The dispute will, however, be considered by the reporter at the gate check. We're anticipating the gate check and bearing in mind that it's a new process, but there are 1 or 2 councils ahead of us, and as a consequence of that, we think that it'll take them about 5 months to get back to us with a response. We will then move on to the next part of the LDP process, which is the call for sites. So we identify a date by which we want everybody who has an interest in developing in East Renfrewshire to bring forward to us the sites that they have control over and their proposals for development of those sites. And that will start to inform the process of allocating sites as we go into the preparation of the proposed plan. So hopefully that clarifies that what sort of most contentious point within the evidence, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that clear presentation, Michaela. And I'll now open it out to questions or comments. Councillor Ireland, Councillor Morrison, anybody else so far?
No.
Okay.
3,100.
Thank you very much, Provost, and thank you, Michaela, for the presentation and the 834-page paper we have before us tonight. I've got a couple of questions on it. It's more to give me an idea of timings of things coming forward. Sorry, Provost, through yourself. On the topic of education provision, paper states that furthermore, many existing schools in established areas are unlikely to be able to host the size of extension needed to accommodate significant new development. This may result in the need for catchment redesign and for a change to the current relationships between clusters of primaries and secondary schools. Given that, as the paper states, education solutions will need to be provided in advance of any housing construction going forward, when do you anticipate that any potential catchment changes or cluster relationship changes will be brought forward, and when will this information be available to residents? Because I think it will be something that, yes, it will happen as part of the process as we move through it, but I'm just wanting an idea of when that will happen in the process. And the second question I had was, it was to pick up on, there's been a lot of consultation done, and it's fantastic, and there's a lot of really good work.
Could I stop you there, please?
Yes,
Councillor? Just so we don't lose
Yes.
the sense of what your first question was. So if we could just take your questions
Certainly.
one by one, that would be good. Thanks. Michaela?
The aim is to have the plan adopted by 2027. So any assessment or review of catchment areas would have to take place between now and the time when we get to adopt the plan. But we're just at such an early stage at the moment, we haven't even begun to identify where any additional houses might be. So it's quite difficult at this stage to estimate. But Mr. Ratta may have a further comment.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, you'll be aware from previous consultations that there's a sort of statutory process that has to be undertaken. That's set out in legislation. Essentially, I always think that takes a minimum sort of 6 months to undertake a consultation. But normally, if you're planning well into something like that, you would run a much longer period ahead of something like that. So I suppose it, as Michaela was saying, it'll depend on where the houses are being proposed. We've not even got the call for sites yet. It's quite a complex jigsaw, I tend to think of. If you take somewhere like St Clair's and Calderwood Lodge as an example, that opened in 2017, but we were doing a consultation in 2014, and that maybe gives you a kind of idea of that kind of run towards. Now, that had additional builds that was required as well, but it's a lengthy process. But I suppose what I would say is that within East Renfrewshire, we are used to doing this kind of process, and we have got that experience, I think, of working closely between education and environment to make sure that we do give proper notice if we were going to do that.
Thank you very much, and I think that's really good to hear, so thank you very much for that. The second one was, and as I was saying, it's the range of consultations that have been phenomenal, actually. There's a lot of work being done, and everyone needs commended for that. There's only one area where I wanted to see more, and it was the local place plans. It was something that I found quite exciting about when the bill came through, the last planning bill. That was something that made me sit up and take notice. So far, there hasn't been any yet. I would have liked to have seen something happen. I mean, they're so important because it allows residents to really feed into what they want for their local community and their ambitions for the community. So, 2 questions on that. Well, it's one, is there any current plans to set up a sort of local steering group, maybe to push that forward and that we can get those underway? Or are any local engagement events planned? I suppose I'm asking, what are we planning to actually kickstart these local place plans, because they're just so important, and I think residents would really love them if they could get their teeth into them. Thank you.
Michaela, thanks.
I know that my colleagues did actually hold an event, didn't confirm? No, we didn't. Right, so I think I'd better hand this over to Richard, because this happened before I joined the council.
So we'd have to get Richard to a microphone, if you wouldn't mind coming down to the microphone, please.
So we have done some preliminary work to try and identify if any groups would be interested in this. So we did right out to all community councils, all local groups, and then there was no initial interest in that, so we've done a secondary contact with all groups as well. At this stage, there's been no firm interest. Nobody's actually come forward to us. I think part of the issue is probably because there's other local action plans and other documents that are out there at the moment that are actually fulfilling a similar sort of purpose. That there's maybe an issue that people feel that these are being addressed in a slightly different format or under a different mechanism at the moment. Obviously, the difference with the local place plan, it will be, help inform the local development plan itself, so it's a slightly different document. But as I say, at the moment, there's been no firm interest from any community groups, and nobody's come forward with any suggestions. I think across Scotland, there's been a few areas have had more interest than others, but generally they haven't necessarily come forward with the level and the sort of the scope that maybe the Scottish Government first envisaged for them.
Thank you. And Richard, could you remind us of your job title, please? It's LDP and Strategy, is that right?
Principal Strategy Officer, LDP Lead.
Thank you very much for that. Finished, Councillor Ireland. Now move to Councillor Morrison. If there anybody else wants to ask a question or make a point. Councillor Wallace after that. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Provost. I'd also like to thank Michaela for the very detailed and helpful presentation. I have to say, reading the report before coming to Council, I saw the Homes for Scotland figure of 13,800 and I thought, oh my, you know, we're about to basically build a new town somewhere in East Renfrewshire. But I'm far more reassured by the number which has been put forward by the Council Strategic Planning Team of 3,100, which I'd like to commend on the record. It sounds like it's pretty much that's what it will be, but it's not done until it's done. And I would really hope that, you know, if the Scottish Government have different ideas in terms of a higher number, you know, anyone that's lived in East Renfrewshire a long time will know our population has grown quite a bit over the years. You know, 6.9% in the decade to 22. We anticipate 6.4% in the decade to 2028, which is 3.5 times higher than the population growth of Scotland nationally. So I think that all that should be taken on board, and I commend the officers for the vast and bounteous work in this report and the figure of 3,100. Thank you.
Very much, Councillor Morrison. Councillor Wallace.
Provost, if I can first say my thanks to Councillor Ireland for raising the thing about the climate change emergency, in which climate change absolutely is interweaved through this paper throughout. In fact, it's mentioned 195 times. But interestingly, the words Greenbelt appear 280 times. I'm just wondering whether we're talking about a Greenbelt emergency. We sincerely hope not. As officers will be aware, we did have concerns over certain aspects of the presentation of this paper, but we do appreciate the significant resource that has gone into building this body of work. It's a huge effort, and we recognise that. And I would particularly like to thank Michaela Sullivan earlier on for having given time over to brief the Conservative group accordingly. I do note that the words consultation have been used extensively. And this paper we have in front of us went out to public consultation, but only attracted 92 responses. Now, I appreciate that when the time comes when sites for development are actually identified, that we will perhaps receive considerably more responses to consultation. And that said, however, it is absolutely imperative that residents cannot come back to us and say they knew nothing about it. For example, I appreciate the significant resource that went into the consultation process and letting the public know about the active travel consultation. And yet, as many who have been to recent community councils are aware, as you are, Provost, that there were many there that knew absolutely nothing about the consultation. We did some work behind the scenes to find out just how much effort did go in, and there was considerable effort. Now, one I felt a very good suggestion was, and Chief Executive mentioned this earlier on about the council tax papers that are having to go out there. Is this an opportunity? We're going to pay for that postage anyway. Is there an opportunity that we can put some information out so that it goes and hits every doorstep on top of what's already happening? That's only one suggestion. The key point I'm trying to make is that it's imperative we have correct communication, very good, effective communication to let the public know, so that we are not perceived as being, or the council is not perceived as trying to get things through the back door, as it were. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wallace. Councillor O'Donnell.
More comments and questions. I think Councillor Wallace has made a very good point on communications. I think we all want to bring the whole of East Renfrewshire behind the proposals, so I think we need to be clear on our communications, and I'm sure that's something we can pick up on the Member Officer Working Group on a regular basis. It's not just one communication. I think it's a variety of communications, so that's a very good point. Secondly, I would just really like to commend the officers for the work that they've done on this. I've learned so much about East Renfrewshire from these topic papers on things that I didn't think I needed to know, but lots of weird and wonderful stuff on soil structures, agricultural quality of land, and obviously biodiversity and woodlands and flood risk, all brilliant. It's a brilliant reference for all councillors, which I'm sure we will be using for years to come. And I can't imagine how many man-years went into the preparation of these topic papers. So I really appreciate the work that's been done on this. I think it is important that we keep all of the councillors together on this journey in terms of where we're going. So I think probably an 800-page report is pretty intimidating and potentially overwhelming for a lot of people. So I think there's lessons to be learned on how we manage that process going forward. So it's comms of members as well as the external world, and I'm sure we've got a good opportunity to sort of reflect on that and see how we can deal with that better going forward. But basically, the comment is an amazing piece of work. Thank you very much. Thanks for the teams of people that have been involved in the preparation of this. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Anderson.
In terms of scale, just to get an idea of what's happened in the past and what we have currently, I believe there's, I don't know how many properties currently within the homes within East Renfrewshire. I believe it's 40,000, just above. Previously, LDP 1 and 2, I'm assuming, had a similar figure, where in terms of the number of homes, like for example, Maidenhill, I believe, has got about 1,000 homes. So the figure of 3,100, how does that compare to what was in the previous LDPs? And to give actually people, publicly, an idea of what the scale of the number of properties we're actually going to potentially build.
In terms of overall numbers, if you take in as a comparison the completion levels, I would say over the last 10 years, so the number we're proposing in the new plan is lower than our previous 10-year completion figure, which works out approximately 329, 330 per annum. So we're proposing at the moment a figure of 310 per annum over a 10-year period. The reason for that is to factor in the lead-in time for development to happen. When you compare the figures from LDP 2 to what's happening now, the figure is higher than the figure we've had previously. So the figure LDP 2 was proposing a figure of roughly about 2,500 over a 10-year period. We're now increasing that number. That's on the basis of the figure that's coming out from the National Planning Framework as our base level, and the requirement to go over and above that. So we felt that with the analysis that we've undertaken when you factor in the funding infrastructure and other constraints that we've identified through this particular process, that's an achievable and deliverable figure to take forward. It's also considerably less than the initial figure the Scottish Government proposed for us, which was 4,300 in the draft MPF4. So we've done a lot of work as part of the Glasgow region itself in terms of how numbers are actually proportioned and how the actual market actually operates on a regional basis to get a figure that's deliverable in an East Rand context and also for the other local authorities in the Clyde Plan area.
Thanks. I think that's the thing that's going to be considerable in people's minds about where are these homes going to go. And obviously we have a very difficult process to actually try and identify the locations mentioned in Greenbelt. So it's going to be a challenge, but as you said, the communication, the comms is going to be absolutely essential that we talk to people and take on board exactly what they're going to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald online, would you like to ask a question or make a point?
Thanks, Provost. A point and a question. To my knowledge, with the information that I've got in front of me here, we currently have 1,370 teachers within East Renfrewshire, comprising of 613 primaries. These are 2022 numbers, I should say. 613 primary teachers, 716 secondary teachers and 37 special teachers. Well, I think it's important to draw attention to how important it is to have infrastructure, school infrastructure in place to accommodate the increase in population as a result of increase of homes. I think it's also important to have a concurrent conversation with the Scottish Government in terms of the year-on-year decrease in teacher numbers. Teacher numbers have been decreasing for the last 3 years for a number of reasons. Less people are taking up the profession to come in, and also the attrition rate is increasing in terms of people leaving the profession. So I would ask Dr. Ratter if he can provide numbers in terms of where we are now with teacher numbers in comparison to 2 years ago, because I have general concerns going forward about not just the infrastructure meeting the needs of the population growth, but also for the fact that we have a bit of a crisis in terms of retaining of teachers. Thank you.
Dr. Ratter.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. The expectation is actually the Scottish Census Week this week, where we have to report to the Scottish Government on the number of pupils and the number of teachers in our schools. And in terms of the sort of approach within East Renfrewshire, our anticipation would be we would be around 1,407 teachers is what we're aiming for. There have been challenges nationally, I suppose, in terms of some recruitment of teachers. I would say across the Central Belt, that's largely been something that's been more manageable. There are particular subject areas that can be more challenging, Councillor MacDonald, but we work with the Scottish Government in terms of sort of workforce planning around that one. But there's not been a reduction in terms of teacher numbers in East Renfrewshire in the last few years. It's been the opposite, it's increased.
Councillor MacDonald, would you like to ask any further questions?
Yeah, I mean, I can accept the fact that probably East Renfrewshire, as far as the teaching profession, is probably quite a desirable place for teachers to take up their first postings. We have an excellent quality of education, as everybody knows, across the council area. I do think, though, that, you know, as I said, I do think that there has to be a concurrent conversation with the Scottish Government to address these issues on a national level as well, because obviously we won't be the only council that will be determining an LDP. And obviously teachers move from one area to another throughout their career. So I think we also have seen quite significant reductions in teacher numbers, particularly for those pupils that require additional support within our own local authority area. And of course, with an increase in houses within the area and an increase in population, those particular needs for additional support needs teachers will increase. So I think we have to have that dual conversation with the Scottish Government about how we realistically meet those demands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other points or questions? Councillor Redland.
Just a comment, and perhaps a question to Michaela. On page 464, the proposal is for a build of up to 3,100 homes, which equates to 2,000 new homes, which is 2 maiden hills effectively in the proposed period of the effectiveness of this new plan if it's adopted. Now, to build 2,000 new homes, I would think would be impossible without great social upheaval. But we're putting this into a proposal which admittedly is just the first stage of the proposal, but I find it difficult to accept any proposal would suggest to people reading it that this council is going to build 2,000 new homes in addition to the other stuff that's carried forward. So I accept that we have to approve this tonight in practical terms, but this proposal, that number, grates on me slightly, and it could come back to bite us later.
Michaela, could you respond to that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Edlin. I agree that it's a challenging number, but Maidenhill is one sort of huge allocation, and I think that what we will be looking to do is to try and identify a series of smaller sites that cover across the districts of East Renfrewshire, and therefore they would be able to be built concurrently in a range of different locations, and that would enable us perhaps to move towards the figure of 3,100 that has been identified through the housing needs and demand assessment. I think you're right in suggesting that construction always causes upheaval. There's no doubt about that, but once you get to the end of the construction period, we will have more homes available in East Renfrewshire than we do at the moment, and that should match up with the need and demand assessment that has been undertaken.
Councillor Edlin.
I find it difficult to conceive of where the space is for these houses, even splitting it into smaller bundles. But I accept Michaela's knowledge on the subject.
Councillor Buchanan.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Just to an echo for some reason. Highlight and thank Michaela and Richard for the work that's gone into the evidence report. I know how difficult it is to pull all of this evidence together. I know that in LDP1, and this is even more complex than LDP1 given the changes under the National Planning Framework. So thank them very much for all of this work and the amount of time that has clearly been spent on it. I think the information in it will gradually come more to bear as the call for sites goes out, and indeed once that comes back, I suspect that the responses that we get in terms of consultation will probably significantly increase. I know that in the past we have probably had more than, I think, even all 31 other authorities put together received during their consultations. So I suspect that will go up once the sites are known and once we start to look at it in that process. But I think this gives us, the evidence report is based on a good piece of solid work going forward. I think that puts us in a very good place. In terms of, I know Mark, the question on teacher numbers was raised. There are ongoing discussions on a regular basis with the government in relation to teacher numbers, but certainly, as Mark highlighted, those get counted on a regular basis, and there's other factors at play as well, including the demography, rurality across all authorities. There is, for example, we know a number of teachers across the central belt which aren't required, but there are also over 300 vacancies currently in My Job Scotland for teachers, so there is scope there, and that gets looked at on a regular basis by all authorities to ensure that they can fulfil the needs and educate our children. So that's an ongoing issue, but again, all authorities are responsible for pulling that together.
Thanks, Councillor Buchanan. If there are no other comments on this, Councillor O'Donnell mentioned worker hours, and worker effort has been mentioned as well, and I think we would all join in on that. And if Councillor Cunningham, I think we both shared experience with Julie Nichol, who worked for many years in planning, and I'm sorry I missed her retirement too, so an example of an officer past and present who gives so much to the benefit of our council and our council area. So I would like to, in closing, thank all the officers for all their work, for all the papers that have been presented to us tonight. And if there are no points or questions now, can we agree the recommendations on page 187? Agreed. And that concludes the business for today, or tonight. and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.